All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the JonBenét Ramsey case.
Ooh, interesting choice.
It's a case that continues to just really captivate people, I think, even after all these years.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. A lot of twists and turns in that one.
So, we're going to be using the Wikipedia article as our source for this one.
Okay. Sounds good.
And really our goal here is to try to sift through all of the information, all of the facts and the evidence that we have,
Mm.
and just try to figure out what are the most intriguing details
Yeah.
and, explore some of those theories that have been put forward over the years.
Yeah, because there's a lot of them out there.
There are a lot, and some of them are, well, some of them are pretty wild.
That's for sure.
But yeah, we're gonna take a look at all of them and see what we can make of this whole thing.
Sounds good. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. So, before we get too deep into it, let's start with the basics, right? Who was JonBenét Ramsey?
Yeah, good place to start. JonBenét Ramsey was a 6-year-old girl
Mm-hmm.
living with her family in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
And she was actually, kind of famous in her own right. She was a child beauty queen, held a few titles like Little Miss Colorado
Wow.
and America's Royale Miss.
So already living a life very much in the public eye, even at that young age.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it goes without saying that this detail, the whole, child duty pageant aspect, really added, I think, a very unique and kind of complex layer to this whole case.
It definitely drew a lot of attention to the case.
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of brought the world of child pageantry into the
Hmm.
spotlight, which is often, scrutinized in its own right.
Yeah, and that's a whole other can of worms that we could open.
Oh, for sure. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it definitely made this case, I think, even more captivating for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's Christmas night, 1996. And what exactly happened? What led to the initial discovery that something was wrong?
Well, the first kind of sign that something was amiss was this ransom note,
Okay.
a handwritten ransom note demanding $118,000, which is
That's pretty specific.
very specific, right? It's curiously close to the amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus from the previous year, John Ramsey being JonBenét's father.
Oh, wow. That's strange. So did they ever figure out, was there some significance to that number? Was there, a reason why they chose that specific amount?
It's actually one of the many mysteries surrounding this case
Really?
that hasn't really been solved. The note itself has been analyzed and scrutinized and, over and over.
Hmm.
And for example, there are phrases in there like SBTC, an acronym, and to this day, nobody knows what it stands for.
Mm.
So details like this, along with the fact that it was so long, this ransom note in a kind of dramatic language,
Oh, okay.
led some investigators to think that, maybe whoever wrote it was actually trying to mislead them.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so right from the get-go, it seems like there were some signs that this might not be a straightforward kidnapping.
Definitely, yeah. It had all these weird elements.
Yeah, definitely some red flags there. So what happened next? Did the Ramseys pay the ransom?
Well, no, they didn't. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother,
Yeah.
she actually called the police right away,
Okay.
which actually went against the instructions in the note.
Oh, wow.
But, they called 911.
Mm-hmm.
Police arrived. But despite searching the house, they couldn't find JonBenét.
So the police were in the house and they didn't find her.
Well, it turns out that the initial search, I mean, these situations are always super high stress.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as thorough as it, probably should have been. And tragically, actually, one of the officers stood right in front of the door to the room where JonBenét's body would later be found,
Oh, no.
but didn't actually open it because it was latched from the inside.
Oh my gosh, that's so eerie, knowing that they were that close to finding her.
I know, it's really, it's a haunting detail.
Yeah. So what happened next? How did they finally find her?
It was actually hours later. John Ramsey, along with a family friend, went back down to the basement,
Okay.
and that's when they made the really awful discovery.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about the crime scene itself. I mean, what was the condition of JonBenét's body when they found her?
Well, I mean, the scene was undeniably disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
Her mouth was covered with duct tape. Her wrists and neck were bound with a nylon cord.
Oh gosh.
Um, and the murder weapon was, I mean, it was particularly brutal. It was a garrote, ligature, made from a paintbrush handle and more nylon cord.
Oh wow, a garrote. That's just yeah.
It's, yeah. And she was partially covered with a blanket.
It's hard to even imagine, like, going through something like that, finding her like that.
I know, it's unimaginable. And the autopsy later confirmed that, the cause of death was strangulation and a skull fracture.
Okay.
And there was also evidence that suggested a possible sexual assault, although no semen was found.
Now, I know that there was something about a bowl of pineapple that was found at the scene that became kind of a key detail in the case. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the autopsy report noted that JonBenét had pineapple in her stomach, undigested pineapple.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, when they were looking at the photos of the crime scene, they noticed a bowl of pineapple
Okay.
sitting on the kitchen table. But here's the thing. Neither John nor Patsy Ramsey ever admitted to putting that bowl there
Mm-hmm.
or to feeding JonBenét pineapple.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, very strange. And it raised a lot of questions, like, who put it there? When was it eaten?
Yeah, that's a good question. Was there any way to, like, connect that pineapple to JonBenét? Like, did they find her fingerprints on the bowl or anything?
Oh, they did find Patsy's fingerprints on the bowl, but they couldn't say for sure when those fingerprints were left there.
Oh, okay. So that doesn't really tell us much then.
Not really, and it just adds another layer of mystery to this whole case.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a ransom note that seems intentionally misleading.
Right.
No signs of forced entry, a seemingly random ransom amount, and now this mysterious pineapple. Where did the police initially focus their investigation?
I mean, given all those strange circumstances, it's understandable that the police initially focused on JonBenét's parents.
Yeah.
The lack of forced entry, the way the ransom note seemed staged,
Mm.
the pineapple thing. I mean, it all just raised a lot of suspicion.
Yeah, for sure. So at this point, were John and Patsy officially considered suspects?
Not officially at that early stage, but they were definitely persons of interest.
Okay. But their behavior and the way they interacted with the police, it didn't really help to, lessen that suspicion, did it?
It didn't, no.
Yeah.
I mean, they did provide some things like handwriting samples and DNA. And John Ramsey even agreed to a preliminary interview.
Mm-hmm.
But they were really hesitant to fully cooperate with the investigation.
Oh, really? In what way?
Well, for one thing, they hired their own legal team very early on, which, it kind of added fuel to the fire.
I can see how that might make them look even more suspicious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're innocent, why wouldn't you cooperate fully? That's what a lot of people were thinking.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then on top of all that, you had the media frenzy that was surrounding this case.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this thing blew up pretty quickly, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it had all the elements of a media sensation.
Right.
A young, beautiful girl murdered in her own home, the holidays.
Yeah.
I mean, it captivated the public, and the Ramseys, they were thrust into the spotlight, whether they wanted to be or not.
Yeah, it's easy to see how public opinion could have influenced the investigation.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to stay objective when you have so much outside pressure.
That's true. So the police were suspicious of the parents, but did they actually have any hard evidence to support that theory?
No, not really. I mean, there wasn't any definitive proof.
Okay.
And as the investigation went on, some things started to emerge that didn't quite fit with the idea that the parents were responsible.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, remember the paintbrush handle that was used to make the garrote?
Yeah.
They never found the bottom part of it, despite searching the house top to bottom.
That's strange.
You'd think that something like that, such a key piece of evidence, wouldn't just disappear.
Right. So did they ever figure out what happened to it?
Nope. It's just another one of the many unanswered questions in this case.
Okay. And then you also mentioned a boot print earlier. Was that also something that didn't quite fit with the parents' involvement theory?
Yeah, so in the basement where JonBenét was found, they found a boot print.
Okay.
It didn't match anyone in the family.
So does that mean that maybe someone else was in the house that night?
Well, that's what some people started to think, and this is where we start to get into the intruder theory.
Ooh, okay. I'm definitely intrigued now. We're going to have to pause here for a quick break, but when we come back, we'll dive into this intruder theory and see what the evidence tells us. All right, so we're back and ready to tackle this whole intruder theory. This is where things start to get a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, for sure. While everyone was focusing on the Ramseys initially, there was always that question lingering in the back of everyone's minds. Like,
Right.
if it wasn't them, then who was it?
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned the boot print, and I think in the last part we talked about there were a lot of burglaries happening around that time. What else made investigators start to think about, the possibility of an intruder.
Well, for one, remember they left some of those windows unlocked.
Oh, right, for the Christmas lights?
Exactly, yeah, for the Christmas lights. So that was a possible entry point right there.
Yeah.
And there was also a basement window that had been damaged previously.
Okay.
So, there were definitely ways that someone could have gotten into the house without necessarily leaving signs of forced entry.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what about a motive? Like, why target JonBenét specifically?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's still one of the most debated aspects of this whole case.
Yeah.
Some investigators, they theorize that maybe JonBenét's involvement in those beauty pageants,
Okay.
all that exposure,
Yeah.
might have made her a target
Oh,
for someone with bad intentions.
that's a scary thought.
Yeah, it's a really unsettling possibility.
It is. But is there any actual evidence, or is it all just speculation at this point?
Well, there is some evidence, and it's a pretty big one. Remember that DNA sample they found?
Oh, yeah, on JonBenét's clothing, right?
Exactly, yeah. And it didn't match anyone in the family.
So whose DNA was it?
Well, that's the thing. They still don't know.
Oh, wow.
They ran it through all the databases, but they never found a match.
Really? So somewhere out there, there's a person whose DNA was at the crime scene.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty compelling evidence for the intruder theory, right? I mean, you can't really argue with DNA.
You can't. And because of that DNA evidence, the Ramseys were actually officially cleared as suspects
Oh, well.
by the district attorney's office in 2008.
Yeah.
They even got a letter of apology for everything they went through.
Wow. A letter of apology. That's huge.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about how long they were under suspicion.
Yeah, for sure. So if it wasn't the parents, then, I mean, who did it? Did they ever find the person whose DNA it was?
Sadly, no. The
Yeah.
case is still unsolved.
Really?
That DNA profile is still out there.
Ah.
And it's the main focus of the investigation.
I can't believe that with all the advances we have in DNA technology now, that they haven't been able to find a match.
It's really baffling. But, they are looking into some new avenues with that DNA.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, like genetic genealogy.
Yeah.
That's been really helpful in solving other cold cases.
Right.
So, they're comparing that unknown DNA to public genealogy databases.
Okay.
And the hope is that maybe they can find some distant relatives of whoever it was and, narrow down the search that way.
I see. So there's still hope then that this could be solved.
There is, definitely. Technology is always evolving.
Yeah.
And you never know what new evidence might turn up.
That's true. But for a while there, the focus shifted away from the DNA and onto a completely different suspect. Remember John Mark Carr?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget?
It was huge news back in 2006.
It was everywhere. His confession really, it just threw everyone for a loop.
It did. So what was his story, and did it actually hold up under scrutiny?
Well, his confession was just full of holes, basically. There were so many inconsistencies, and he kept giving these details that just didn't line up with the facts of the case. And then, of course, there was the DNA.
Right.
His DNA didn't match the DNA they found at the crime scene.
Oh, so it was a false confession.
It was. Which,
Yeah.
It's pretty bizarre.
It is. Why would someone do that, especially for such a high-profile case?
Who knows? Some people thought he was just looking for attention. Others
Yeah.
thought maybe he had some sort of delusion
Yeah.
that he was involved somehow.
That's a possibility. Well, whatever his reason, it sounds like his confession was a dead end for the investigation.
Yeah, definitely. It just goes to show that even when you think you have a solid lead, it doesn't always pan out.
Yeah, that's true. And it also shows just how complex this case really is.
It is. You've got all this evidence,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still so hard to know what really happened.
Yeah. And I think, too, you can't ignore the role that the media played in all of this.
Oh, for sure.
This case was a media circus from day one.
It was. And you have to wonder how much of an impact all that scrutiny had on the investigation.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be helpful, right? Keeping a case in the public eye.
Yeah, it can lead to new tips and things.
Right. But it can also create a lot of misinformation and bias.
Oh, yeah. And it puts a lot of pressure on the investigators.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the JonBenét case is a perfect example of how media attention can be both a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, for sure. And, at the end of the day, we have to remember that this is about real people. The Ramseys, whether they were involved or not, they went through a lot.
Yeah, they did.
It was a trial by media in a lot of ways.
It was. They were constantly being judged and accused.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind as we're discussing this case.
I agree. It's easy to get caught up in the theories and the evidence,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't forget about the human cost of this tragedy.
That's a good point. We've talked a lot about the evidence, the different theories, the investigation, but there's another side to this whole story,
Right.
one that we haven't really touched on yet, and it's the kind of the human cost of all of this, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, this case, it wasn't just about solving the crime. It became this media spectacle,
Right.
this huge thing, this source of, just endless speculation and debate that went way beyond, like, the search for the truth.
It did, yeah. And the Ramseys, I mean, whether they were guilty or not, they were just constantly being accused and shamed in the public eye.
Yeah, it was a trial by media in a lot of ways.
It was. It really was. And that trial by media, I mean, it had some real-world consequences, too. Like, all those defamation lawsuits,
Yeah, that was a whole other chapter in this saga.
they were pretty aggressive about defending their reputation, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. Both John and Patsy and even some of their friends, they filed lawsuits against, all sorts of people, media outlets, publishers,
Yeah.
anyone who they thought had, made false accusations against them.
So, like, tabloids and stuff?
Oh, yeah, tabloids. They went after the authors and publishers of a book called JonBenét, Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation.
Mm.
Even some former investigators who had written books about the case.
Did they win those lawsuits?
Some they did, some they didn't. That one I just mentioned, the one about the book, that one was actually settled out of court.
Oh, okay.
But, it just shows how far they were willing to go to try to protect their name.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the details of the case, the evidence and the theories and all that.
Right.
But we can't forget that there were real people at the center of this whole thing.
Absolutely. People whose lives were just shattered by this tragedy.
Yeah. And the media frenzy that surrounded it.
Yeah. Imagine having to deal with all of that on top of the grief and the loss.
It's unimaginable. So where do things stand today? After all these years, is there any chance that this case will ever be solved?
Officially, it's still unsolved.
Good.
But the Boulder Police Department, they say it's still an open investigation.
Really? So they're still working on it?
They are. They still get tips, and they follow up on any new leads that come in.
What should people do if they think they might have information about the case?
Well, they should contact the Boulder Police Department directly. Any information, even if it seems small or insignificant, it could be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes those little details, those things that seem unimportant,
Mm-hmm.
they can be the key to solving a case.
Exactly. And, technology is always advancing,
Right.
especially DNA technology. So there's always chance that new evidence could emerge.
Yeah, there's still hope.
There is, definitely. This case, it's one of those cases that just captures people's imagination.
It does.
It reminds us that, even when it seems like all hope is lost, we should never give up on the search for truth and justice.
That's a really good point. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive, to say the least.
It has.
It's a story that makes you think, about the nature of truth, about the media, about, I don't know, just about life in general, I guess.
Yeah, it really does. It's one of those stories that just stays with you.
It is. Well, thanks for joining us on this journey into the JonBenét Ramsey case. And if you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to, do your own research, form your own opinions, and most importantly, never forget the little girl at the heart of it all.
Well said.
That's all for this week's deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep those minds open.